The first patch of Set 8 was launched a week ago, and many of the strongest comps, units, and augments have been nerfed in this B patch. And in this video, I'm going to take you through every change in the newest patch notes, explain how it affects the meta, and then give my prediction of what will be the strongest for the foreseeable future. Firstly, let's look at champions. Ashe's whole kit got nerfed, her base AD was lowered, and her spell loses important scaling from both AD and AP, especially at 3-star. This is a great change, as Ashe not only was an oppressive early game presence that would often let you win streak easily, but also the Ashe Super's reroll comp had way too much power in the mid and late game for a 1-cost reroll comp. Ashe should still remain a solid option as an early game carry, but the rerolling will likely be carry augment dependent now. Lux's attack speed was buffed slightly, which is a nice change that allows her to get more cast offs in the early game boards. Poppy's max mana was lowered by 10. This is a nice change for early Gadgeteen boards that need a little extra damage and tankiness. Renekton's bonus HP from his spell was nerfed. This is a good change, especially at 2-star, as he was way too tanky on stage 2 boards. This change also further nerfs the Ashe Super's comp, as Renekton was often the secondary carry and main tank there. This unit should still be very strong, just not as oppressive as he once was. Fiora's attack speed was buffed. This is actually pretty important for her, as Duelist will amplify this change even further. The Fiora and Yasuo reroll comp might actually be decent now with a good hero augment. Malphite was one of the weakest units on this set launch. This is a nice buff, but shouldn't really move the needle too much on him. Yuumi's max mana was decreased by 10. This is great for her, as she not only casts more often, but reaches that 3 auto threshold now with Spear of Sojin. Yuumi reroll with the carry augment was pretty mediocre before, but now it should be a more viable option on stage 2-1. Jack's reroll rose to S tier over the past few days due to its ease of execution, the strength of the 2-star board, and its positive matchup into Viego and Zed comps made it really powerful. He loses both attack speed and late round damage, which should keep him more on check, especially during the mid game. Jax will still be strong after this patch, but he won't be the no-brainer of a mid-game item holder or late-game carry that he was previously. Over the last few days, Vel'Koz has quietly gained traction as one of the best units in Set 8. He's incredibly easy to slash into any board and deals unnecessarily amounts of damage to carries despite being a support and utility unit. The nerf to his damage is very healthy for the game, as he will no longer be able to one-shot half your board during stage 2. Zoe is one of the most flexible units of the set. She can fit into almost any board, pumping out great damage and acting as a pseudo frontline with Prankster while having 3 amazing traits. This nerf was definitely needed, though it won't affect her viability too much, since she wasn't really a solo carry in the comps she was normally played in, and her status as a Morello plier, hard AP scaler, and Prankster trait bot will remain unchanged. Aesol was probably the weakest 4-cost carry of last patch, and he is getting a much needed damage buff. Each of the meteors will deal a bit less damage now, but he will cast 4 of them instead of 3. It should be much easier to play him as a main carry now, or as an item holder for other AP carries, though he will struggle to take down most of the really tanky units like mechs. Misfortune is another weak AP carry that got a sizable buff. Like Aesol, she is a plug-and-play unit on many boards, though playing her with a Nima squad should feel much better now. The strongest unit during the first week of the set was Viego, and he's getting a pretty big nerf. His targeted and AoE spell damage are going down, and his damage falloff after resetting was also nerfed. Viego's design makes him reliant on resetting on weaker targets to chain wipe the entire boards. If he doesn't get started with that, he'll often just get focused down and die. These nerfs will hopefully make him much more bearable, as he won't be able to take down entire boards off of a couple of casts, but he should still be able to do good immediate damage and reset enough against weaker targets. If Viego was oppressive in the meta as an AP carry, then Zed was his AD counterpart. Though not as powerful as Viego, Zed's amazing traits and ability to be played on almost any board with many different items and backline access placed him among the best game's units. The AD nerf is pretty big, as common items like Runans, Deathblade, and IE will scale much worse now, and he won't be able to chew through mega tanks like mechs at all. The armor and MR nerf isn't too bad, as he usually wants a defensive item anyway, but this might allow backline units to burst him down a little bit quicker than before. Fiddlesticks has been mainly used as a frontline CC bot for the first part of set 8 rather than a carry, as it's usually hard to 2-star and move AP items onto him. The HP and movement speed buffs should allow him to live longer and reach more targets when casting, so itemizing and backlining him should be more viable next patch. Syndra gets her attack range buffed to 4, which is nice to see. She often walked up to auto attack during fights and died early as a result, so being able to properly backline her is great. Now moving on to traits, Heart gets a nice buff at 4 and 6. This is nice to see, as playing 4 or 6 Heart usually means playing bad units like Lee Sin, Yuumi, or Lulu late game, and this makes it more worth it. Ox4's emblem is statistically the best emblem in the game, so it's no surprise that the trait is getting a nerf. The attack speed combined with the immunity on AD units, especially Zed, was incredibly strong, especially at 6 and 8, so it's good to see a huge nerf coming into those in particular. Recon was one of the worst traits off launch, as all it did was give a glove's worth of crit at 2 and 3, but buffing Recon at 3 and 4 should make Recon spat a little more useful, and maybe open up the door for Ashe and Ezreal to pop up in Kai'Sa and Vayne boards. Now moving on to items, the best frontline trait on launch was Brawlers, which gives % scaling to your units, including belt items like Warmogs and Redemption. Warmogs was the best item in the game, as it was worth half an item or more when playing 4, 6, or even 8 Brawlers, and commonly used champions like Renekton scale their spells off of max HP. Therefore, losing 20% of the value is a huge nerf, so you should think twice before slamming this item in the future. Redemption also scales off of max HP, so it was overperforming on Brawlers and Mechs, and gets a small nerf in this patch. Moving on to Augments, Big Friend has overperformed due to the amount of units over the HP threshold, including Brawlers, Mechs, and 3-star units. Raw damage reduction is incredibly strong with the amount of armor and MR shred that is going on in the meta right now. This nerf should prevent it from being an augment that is always strong, which is good for the balance of the game. The prismatic cybernetic augments are getting small buffs, which is nice to see. Electrocharge has provided insane value for teams with tanky frontlines like Mechs and Brawlers, especially during the early game, and Spark being almost necessary on AP comps has allowed Electrocharge to synergize greatly with just about every comp. These are pretty decent nerfs across the board, which should bring the augment back where it's supposed to be. With the new change to blue buff and the number of low mana carries in the game like Zoe, Soraka, and Sona, Ludens has become an auto pick in many situations. These nerfs should limit high roll Gadgettine, Heart, and Star Guardian boards from running away in the late game. Moving on to hero augments, Annie's carry augment has struggled in the data heavily, so this buff was definitely needed. Although it's quite small, the augment should still be good in some situations, but I would still generally avoid it if I had better options. Camille reroll was one of the best hero augment dependent comps in the meta, so it's no surprise to see it getting nerfed. This is a pretty big nerf, as it lowers both her AD and the AD scaling shield she gets at half health. This comp should still be good, but not a top 5 augment in that game statistically like it was previously. Draven is a pretty bad unit in the meta right now, so the buff to his support augment will justify his place on some boards. Ezreal reroll was unplayable last patch, so the buff to his attack speed and AP is quite nice for him and might make the comp viable now. The Fiora carry augment was awful last patch, and the small buff to it likely won't be enough to make it good, despite the buffs to Fiora as well. The Gangplank carry augment was also pretty bad last patch, but hopefully the slight buff can make Gangplank reroll viable. Increasing the chances of gold to 50% makes Gangplank support augment way more reliable and a strong source of income, which is a nice change to see, as it previously wasn't worth taking the trade-off of losing the combat power of a hero augment. Jinx reroll was gutted when all the Anima squad champions were nerfed before the release. This is a pretty big buff, but the comp was already so bad and it probably won't make it viable. Malphite gets a bit more AP from his carry augment, but this augment will probably still suck until Malphite gets more buffs. Mordekaiser's carry augment gets a small buff that helps him scale faster during fights. This should allow him to wipe boards late game much easier than before with good items. Rell gets a bit more AP from her carry augment. This doesn't really change anything, as the extra damage on Rell doesn't really affect her status as a tank. Renekton's carry augment provides a ton of bonus damage to your team, and could easily fit into S-tier comps like Zed and Jax. This nerf was definitely justified, though the augment should still be pretty good. Sivir's support augment was one of the best utility options for a 2-cost hero augment, and it gets a very small nerf to bring down its power level to where it should be. At the cost of some econ, Syndra's support augments gave 63 AP to your whole team, which was way too strong, so it's good to see this nerf slightly. Vayne is usually played as a secondary carry in most comps, and her carry augment didn't provide meaningful damage for her. This is a good buff, but this augment will probably still be on the weaker side. Vel'Koz's carry augment was one of the infuriating things in TFT, as it often just nukes backline carries and scales off of AP. Making this deal less damage per second is nice, but this augment should still be very good. Vi support augment was the #1 augment in the game on launch. You can play her on almost any board. It gives great stats to your whole team, and it also scales with brawlers. This is a pretty big nerf to brawler boards with this augment in particular, but it should still be relatively similar otherwise, as you only lose around 400 effective HP. The augment is still great, but not an instant pick for every comp like it was before. The bug fix to Viego's carry augment is a huge buff to it, though the nerfs to the AP and Viego as a whole should make it pretty balanced. Viego's support augment provided great sustain for him and other carries like Camille, Zed, and especially Leona. This is a good nerf, but it probably isn't big enough to fully keep it in check. As the meta has settled, a few comps rose to the top of patch 12.23. Here is a look of the tier list from the last patch, and as you can see, every S tier comp was nerfed significantly, and both MF and Heart were buffed, so every comp should be reasonably balanced in the next patch, aside from Ashe Super's reroll, which should just be a hero augment only comp. The S tier of this patch should feel a lot more like the A tier now. I would lean more into Samira during this patch, as she should be quite comparable to Zed and caps higher than him with Aphelios 2-star, while I would play more Talia if I have AP items rather than prioritizing Viego every game. Since everything should be pretty balanced, you should try to remain as flexible as possible, so be on the lookout for a tier list video on Sunday where I give an updated tier list after the meta from the B patch has settled. Thank you so much for watching. If you learned something, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you want cheat sheets for any of my comp guides, they're available for YouTube members and patrons, and links to those are down in the description. And if you want to get better at TFT, join the Discord. We got over 9,000 other players there who are hungry to climb. And if you want to get coached by me, the information is over on the Discord server as well. So take care and see you in the next video.